Darth Vader's lightsaber style was the deadliest in all of Star Wars, and the reason it worked has nothing to do with what most people think. He was missing most of his body. He was sealed inside a suit that caused him constant pain. He could barely raise his arms above his head. He had no mobility, no flexibility, damaged lungs, a mechanical delay in every limb, and pain that never stopped. On paper, he should have been one of the weakest lightsaber fighters in the galaxy. Instead, he became the most dangerous one who ever lived. And the story of how that happened isn't really about lightsaber forms at all, but about adaptation. Where most Jedi and Sith learn from masters, Vader learned from defeats. He studied the fighting style of every opponent who ever beat him, stole the best elements from each one, and rebuilt himself into something that none of them could have predicted. The result was a combat system so complete that when it was recently tested against Darth Maul, one of the greatest duelists in Sith history, the former Sith Lord didn't just lose, he turned and ran. As a Jedi youngling, Anakin originally trained in Form 4, known as Ataru, an acrobatic combat style built on lunges, leaps, and rapid three-dimensional movement. In Legends, particularly the reference books The Jedi Path and Jedi vs. Sith, Ataru required its user to master rapid spins, somersaults, and cartwheels, using the Force to boost speed and stamina. To an outsider, a practitioner appeared as nothing more than a blur. It was tiring, explosive, and best employed in short, crushing bursts. For a young Anakin, strong in the Force and naturally athletic, it was a good fit. But it wasn't the right fit. Anakin eventually switched to Form 5, known as Gemso, the dueling variant called the Perseverance form. Gemso was the most physically demanding of all combat styles. While Ataru required speed and agility, Form 5 required raw strength. Jedi of towering build were specifically encouraged to focus on it because it required less agility than other forms. Its core idea was simple: turn every defensive moment into an immediate counterstrike and overpower the opponent before the fight could develop. Some Jedi described it by the maxim, peace through superior firepower. Its signature move, the Falling Avalanche, was an overhand blow using Force-enhanced strength to shatter armor. Its defining technique was the fluid counterstrike, deflecting an incoming attack and hitting back in one continuous motion. Form 5 fosters an unhealthy focus on domination, which made it controversial for Jedi. For a future Sith, that same quality would become its greatest strength. The Revenge of the Sith novelization, a Legend source, shows what Gemso looked like at full power. Written through Count Dooku's eyes during their final duel, the account reveals that Anakin's opening stance and acrobatic moves had been a trick. The young Jedi was a Gemso stylist, and as fine a one as the Count had ever seen. Dooku's own elegant Makashi, a precision fencing style, simply could not generate enough power to meet Form 5 head-to-head. Anakin was unstoppable and impossibly powerful, pressing forward with relentless strikes that gave no room to breathe. Each parry cost the Count more energy than he had used to throw Obi-Wan across the room. Each block aged him a decade. The older Sith retreated upstairs, using the higher ground for support, but his opponent just kept coming, tirelessly fierce. This instinct for choosing the form that best matches natural strengths would define everything Anakin did after Mustafar. But Gemso alone had a critical weakness: its lack of mobility. An opponent who could avoid the power strikes and take advantage of the gaps between them could find openings. Gemso gave Vader a foundation, but the form alone was powerful and predictable. The real weapons came from the two men who beat Anakin worst, and what he stole from each of them. The first teacher was Dooku himself. On Geonosis, early in the Clone Wars, the Count severed Anakin's right arm, exposing the cost of throwing unrefined aggression against a precision duelist. Dooku's primary form was Makashi, the preferred style for blade-to-blade dueling and the most elegant of all traditional forms. Known as the contention form, Makashi focused on precision strikes and control footwork. A practitioner advanced or retreated along a single line, avoiding leaps entirely. It was a one-handed style, and a successful Makashi duel ended quickly by slipping past an opponent's guard with a disarming strike. In the Book of Sith, a Legends reference work written partly from the Count's perspective, Dooku dismisses the Jedi's 6 lightsaber forms as a waste of time. For Dooku, Hops and cartwheels were for the rabble. His contempt for acrobatic fighting was absolute. He identifies Jem So as the Sith's strong style and defines it as combining body weight and muscular strength with the energizing drug of anger, so that every blow lands with enough force to crack armor. Where the Jedi allowed the Force to flow through them passively, the Count actively directed it, using dark side energy to subtly alter his opponent's balance and disrupt their timing. His philosophy demanded that a battle end quickly, with the Sith always assessing the most direct method to finish an opponent. Over the course of the Clone Wars, Anakin fought Dooku multiple times, and Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader is direct about what it cost him. Beyond Obi-Wan, it was the Count who taught Anakin the most about combat, not through lessons, but through repeated losses. Dooku never knew he was building the weapon that would eventually replace everything he represented. The second teacher was Obi-Wan Kenobi, and the lesson came at the highest possible price. After thousands of hours of lightsaber sparring together, the two Jedi knew each other better than brothers, complementary halves of a single warrior. This closeness would later explain why Kenobi was the one opponent who could always counter Vader's rebuild style. He knew every instinct, every habit, every opening from the inside. Obi-Wan's primary form was Seresu, the resilience form, the ultimate expression of defense. Its masters were said to be unbreakable against all forms of attack. The mechanics were specific: pull all moves close to the body, seldom make sweeps or lunges, and create a tight defensive barrier that makes it nearly impossible for an enemy to land more than a glancing blow. A Seresu master could not easily attack back, but the tight defense preserved the Jedi's energy while wearing down the opponent at the same time, and a tired enemy would eventually slip up. True masters of Form 3 had long been considered all but unbeatable, rarely overcome even when they could not overcome their opponents in turn. What this looked like in practice was best shown in the same Legends novelization during Obi-Wan's fight against General Grievous. The cyborg attacked with 4 arms, striking 12 times per second, each blow coming from a different angle at a different speed. Not one touched Kenobi. His blade wove an intricate web of angles and curves, never truly fast but always just fast enough, each motion subtly interfering with 3 or 4 or 8 of the general's strikes. When Grievous pushed to 20 attacks per second, the Jedi Master used his defense to attack, shifting the angle of a single parry to slice through a hand grip instead of blocking the opposing blade. Every motion served a purpose, but the opponent's own aggression turned against them. The same storyline includes a conversation between Mace Windu and Obi-Wan that captures the philosophy perfectly. Mace explains that every great Jedi chose a form that made up for a specific personal weakness. His own Vapad, a dangerous variant of Form 7, channeled his inner darkness. Yoda's Ataru made up for his small size and age. When Kenobi protested that Seresu was too simple, Mace corrected him. He called Obi-Wan not just a master of Seresu, but the master of it. On Mustafar, the lava world where their brotherhood shattered, Anakin learned what happens when Jem So has no defensive fallback. The fallen Jedi attacked without pause, spinning and whirling, slicing metal from the walls and hurling it at his former master with the full heat of his fury. He smashed Kenobi into walls using the Force. He bent the older man's forearms near to the point of breaking, but Obi-Wan's Seresu patience held. He gave ground over and over, his balance flawless as he parried chop after chop, guiding the fight rather than trying to overpower it. When Anakin finally made the reckless leap his opponent was waiting for, one slash cut through both of his remaining legs and his left arm. What came next should have been impossible. The Legends novel Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader lays out the full cost of Mustafar. His alloy lower legs used cheap materials. His heavy cloak and chest plating restricted him so badly he could scarcely lift his arms over his head. His vision was reddened and narrow through the mask's filtered lenses. Even his new hands were too large to copy the loose grip Anakin had once favored, forcing him to build a thicker, longer lightsaber hilt that the same account describes as clumsy and awkward. He tried to create something new, but ended up building a black version of Anakin's old weapon, down to the beveled emitter shroud. The weapon itself was an act of adaptation, a fighter unconsciously returning to the only design he trusted. Vader assessed his condition in blunt terms. This was not walking, not seeing, not hearing, not breathing, not living. He called it continual torture. But Vader still had Gemso, the one form that required strength over mobility. His artificial limbs gave him more of that than Anakin ever had. His mechanical arms could crush a lightsaber hilt. His strikes could crack battle-grade metal. The Foundation survived, and now he had to build something new on top of it. Before he could refine his style, he needed a weapon. In the canon comic, Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith, the Emperor explains that a Sith does not receive a lightsaber. It must be taken. Vader was sent to hunt down a Jedi and claim the crystal from their weapon. The crystals inside lightsabers are alive, pulsing with light side energy. To make it serve the dark side, Vader had to pour his pain into the crystal, corrupt it with his anger until it bled and turned red. He took it to Mustafar, the very world that had destroyed him, and broke it through sheer force of will. The crystal fought back, showing him visions, tempting him towards the light. He resisted, and the crystal bled. The red blade became his. After Mustafar, Vader wasn't asking how he could become the greatest swordsman. He was asking how he could make sure that he never lost again. Those are different goals, and the difference is what made him the deadliest fighter in the galaxy. Dooku had taught him precision. Obi-Wan had taught him patience. Mustafar had taught him caution. The suit taught him efficiency, and the dark side taught him aggression. The result wasn't a dueling form, it was a survival system. Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader shows the evolution in real time. On the planet Mercana, just weeks after Mustafar, Vader fights Jedi Master Vol Shatak. A witness observes that Shatak is all grace and speed, her lightsaber seeming like an extension of her body. The Sith Lord, by contrast, is clumsy, his strikes mostly vertical. At various times, his stances copy Ataru and Ceresu, but he appears to lack a style of his own and moves stiffly. He wins through raw power alone, beating the Master down before killing her. She manages to wound his left forearm in the process, releasing sparks instead of blood. Afterwards, in private, the Dark Lord questions himself. Only Dooku, Ventress, and Obi-Wan had ever been skilled enough to injure him. An ordinary knight should not have managed it. He wondered whether the loss of his limbs had cost him something deeper, whether the strength and the Force had gone with them. But just weeks later on the Wookiee home world of Kashyyyk, something has changed. When Jedi Knights Diadem Forte and Iwo Kolka attack him as a team, each using a radically different lightsaber style to throw him off balance, Vader stands like a statue with his blade angled towards the ground until the very instant they strike, and then he moves. The same account describes the change clearly. He is faster than anyone remembered from Mercana, and more agile. His style now borrows elements from all techniques of combat, even from the highest and most dangerous levels. His moves are crisp and unpredictable. His ability to see his opponent's strategies before they happen keeps his blade always one step ahead, despite the two-handed grip he uses. He toys with both knights, grazing Forte on the shoulder, then the thigh, piercing Kolka lightly in the abdomen, shaving flesh from the side of his face, before killing them both. He then cuts down 2 more Jedi survivors immediately afterward. What makes this even more telling is that the two-person strategy Forte and Kolka use was modeled on second-hand accounts of the Dooku fight on Geonosis. They had studied that battle through reports, not through real experience fighting a Sith. Their approach was built on theory rather than practice, and Vader tore through it without effort. When Padawan Ollie Starstone attacked the Dark Lord in a fury, he allowed her to wear herself out exactly as the Temple's old swordmaster used to do with students, letting them believe they were driving him back before disarming them in one rapid motion. He flicked his blade with precision and without waste, forcing her backwards step by step. She later reflected that fighting him felt like fighting a droid programmed to counter all her best moves. Mid-fight, the Sith Lord even coached her verbally, telling her that her thoughts gave her away, urging her to call on her anger, deliberately trying to draw her towards the dark side, even as he pushed her towards the edge of a balcony. The gem-soaked base delivered crushing single-power strikes designed to end exchanges rather than extend them. He rarely used more than 2 consecutive attacks. Each swing carried enormous weight, but stayed controlled. Layered on top was Makashi's precision. taken from the Count, which stripped away the wild, uncontrolled quality that had defined Anakin's version of Form 5. Every motion had a purpose. He fought like a fencer, targeting specific openings rather than hammering through guards. And underneath sat the Ceresu defensive shell, learned from Obi-Wan, giving him the ability to switch from crushing offense to nearly perfect defense in an instant, protecting every exposed piece of his life support system. His mechanical arm was strong enough to deliver full-power strikes with one hand that most fighters needed two hands to match. This freed his other hand for force attacks, grappling, or simply holding it in reserve as a constant threat. Later, during the Bespin duel against Luke Skywalker, as described in the Empire Strikes Back novelization, a legend source, the Sith Lord controlled the entire fight one-handed while barely working hard, disarming the young Jedi with just two graceful moves. This one-handed control became a signature of his mature style, meaning his swordsmanship was never just swordsmanship. There was always a second weapon ready. A Jedi annotation in the same legend source captures why this combination was so unusual. Without peace, you can't keep your mind clear. Unless they overwhelm an enemy right away, most Sith Lords will eventually lose in a lightsaber duel. Most Sith burned out because they relied entirely on rage. Vader avoided this by adding Obi-Wan's patience to his system. He could sustain a fight for as long as he needed. He wasn't most Sith. Vader may not have been the most technically gifted duelist in Star Wars history, but he may have built the most efficient fighting system anyone ever created. After the Kashyyyk campaign, a turning point arrived. The same Legends account describes a shift in the Dark Lord's inner state. He felt unbreakable in a way that had nothing to do with his metal limbs or his armor, which now seemed like nothing more than an outfit. The confidence and the wound drove him in the same direction. 3 years after Mustafar, as shown in issue 13 of the canon comic series, the Dark Lord still relived the duel in his meditation chamber, replacing key moments over and over. The defeat remained an active wound driving his ongoing refinement. However, the blade was only one layer of what made this fighter so lethal. He stacked 2 more weapons on top of his combined swordsmanship that most opponents never saw coming. The first was real-time force use during combat. Most force-sensitive fighters are forced to split their focus between moving objects with the force and fighting with a blade. Vader did both at the same time, with almost no visible effort. He consistently turned the surroundings into a weapon, throwing objects, collapsing structures, pulling the ground out from under his opponents mid-fight. His sheer size, his presence, and the dark side energy pouring off of him hit opponents before the blade ever did. Just being near him made trained Jedi hesitate, and hesitation was all he needed. One opening, one moment of weakness, and the fight was over. The second weapon was Dunmak, an ancient Sith technique of psychological warfare that used words to break an opponent's focus and destroy their confidence. Any combat situation could be improved by it, and it took only a few words to expose an opponent's doubts and turn them into a weapon. Dooku himself approved of the concept, calling it an added weapon he intended to perfect. However, Dunmak can backfire if it pushes an enemy into blind rage. Even then, that anger opens the opponent to the dark side, which can be used against them in its own way. A related technique called Mind Shard involved hurling a sliver of psychic pain into an opponent's mind, leaving them exposed to a blade strike. Combined with verbal taunts, the two techniques created a layered psychological attack that ran alongside the physical fight. The philosophy driving all of this came from a core Sith belief. The Sith Code, written thousands of years before Vader's time, rejected peace entirely and taught that passion led to strength, strength led to power, and power led to victory. Where the Jedi taught their students to suppress emotion and fight from a place of calm, the Sith channeled that emotion as fuel. The Sith relied on passion for strength. They embraced the full range of experience, from the heights of joy to the depths of hatred and despair. That was why they were more powerful. They were not afraid to feel. Vader's pain, his hatred, his fury, these were not weaknesses. They were the engine that powered every strike, every force attack, and every word of Dunmak he delivered. No one in the galaxy was trained to handle all three at once. That gap in training was itself another factor working in the Dark Lord's favor. For roughly 1,000 years before the Clone Wars, the Jedi Order had been neglecting blade-to-blade combat. In the Legends continuity, Form 2, the premier dueling discipline, became an outdated practice after the ancient Battle of Ruusan because there were so few situations where Jedi fought opponents carrying lightsabers. Some Jedi Masters suggested the Order should re-examine Form 2 training after Obi-Wan encountered a Sith Lord on Naboo, but others argued that such encounters would remain extremely rare as long as the Sith limited their numbers to 2. Fewer and fewer Padawans chose to study it. Meanwhile, the current standard was Form 6, known as Naman, described as the least combat-focused of all styles, preferred by Jedi who devoted their time to peacemaking and study rather than fighting. Survivors of Order 66, the Emperor's command that turned the clone army against the Jedi, entered their encounters with Vader having never faced anything like him. Even the Inquisitors, former Jedi turned dark side hunters who served the Empire, carried this weakness. In issue number 7 of the canon Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith comic, the Sith Lord criticizes them directly. He tells the Grand Inquisitor that the Hunters fight like Jedi, defensive, moving to attack only when there is no other choice. The Jedi had taught that a battle could be counted a victory even if both parties survived. Vader called this an error that had infected all of their tactics. During a sparring session, he cut off the sixth brother's arm. When the Grand Inquisitor protested, Vader dismissed the objection. Loss was the lesson, and the sixth brother would never forget it. It was the same brutal teaching method that his own defeats had used on him. Loss on Geonosis had given him Makashi. The loss on Mustafar had given him Ceresu. Now he was passing that same lesson forward. But the technical breakdown means nothing without results. The proof is in the fights themselves, and the Dark Lord's record across 2 decades shows a pattern of total control against opponents at every level. In that same canon comic, the Sith Lord faces Kirak Infilla, a Jedi Master whose sole purpose within the Order had been combat. Infilla had taken the Barash Vow, a voluntary withdrawal from all Jedi affairs, before Order 66, leaving him fully prepared and untouched by the Purge. In their first blade-to-blade fight, the Jedi Master dominated Vader completely, called him weak, and threw him off a cliff. He even sensed the Dark Lord through the Force, describing him as cold and dark, as if the Sith had absorbed all the pain the Jedi felt when their Order was destroyed. Vader survived, repaired himself, and returned. But this time, he didn't try to outfight the Jedi Master with a lightsaber. He used the Force to destroy a dam above the city, ripped Infilla's weapon from his hands, broke his neck, and released the floodwaters while the dying man watched. It was the first clear proof that his approach to combat would never be limited to the blade. On Kashyyyk, the duel against Jedi Knight Roan Shrine demonstrated the Force layer at its purest. Midway through the fight, the Dark Lord turned off his lightsaber entirely and used the Force to rip apart the wooden ramps around them, hurling debris from all directions faster than the Jedi could block. Vader stood in the center of the destruction with his arms crossed and his lightsaber hanging from his blade, not even using the blade. On Bespin, years later, the same approach reached its most refined form. In the Empire Strikes Back novelization, the Sith Lord waited quietly for Luke to attack first. When the young Jedi lunged, Vader deflected the blow without effort. He spoke calmly throughout the entire duel, goading him, telling him his hatred could give him the power to destroy Vader, urging him to take revenge. When Luke advanced again, Vader turned off his weapon entirely. Machinery detached from the walls and flew at him from all directions. Wires pulled themselves free, sparking and whipping at him. The Dark Lord stood still and in complete control at the center of the room. When the fight resumed on the gantry, Vader waited for a single instant of distraction. One moment where Luke's eyes tracked a piece of falling equipment and slashed off his hand. On Malachor, as shown in the canon animated series Rebels, the Dark Lord defeated Ezra Bridger in seconds before engaging Ahsoka Tano, his former Padawan and a dual-wielding combat veteran with decades of experience. His superior strength eventually forced her into the chasm below, but when she resurfaced and cracked his helmet open, the Dark Lord hesitated, calling out her name before regaining control. She was one of only a handful of opponents who ever managed to hurt him in a straight fight. Against Obi-Wan on the Barren Moon, as shown in the canon series Obi-Wan Kenobi, the Sith Lord used the full 3-layer assault, lightsaber strikes, Force-guided boulders, and his own armored fist all at the same time, before collapsing the ground beneath his former master and burying him alive. On Mapuzo, earlier in the same series, He had already dominated a weakened Kenobi, seizing him with the Force and dragging him through fire, telling him directly that he was what Kenobi had made him, targeting the older man's guilt with surgical precision. But Kenobi survived the barren moon burial. Driven by thoughts of the children he was protecting, the Jedi Master blasted himself free and returned, abandoning his Cerestu defense entirely and launching a furious offensive that drove Vader back. The one opponent who knew it from the inside turned its own tactics against the man who built it. Kenobi hurled debris with the Force in a massive attack, then used his lightsaber's handle to smash Vader's chest control panel, heavily damaging the life support system. He dodged a desperate overhead strike and countered with a slash that caught his opponent in the back, dropping him where he stood. A final leaping blow sliced open the helmet. With the mask cracked, Obi-Wan saw Anakin's scarred face and called him by his old name. Vader told him that Anakin was gone and that he was what remained. He insisted that the older man had not killed Anakin, that he had done it himself. On the second Death Star, the final fight between Vader and his son showed both the strength and the single true weakness of everything he had built. In the Legends novelization, father and son circled each other. Luke readied his attack from a classic high guard, while Vader held a lateral stance in classic answer. The young Jedi brought his blade straight down, then feinted and cut low. Vader countered and let the impact direct his blade towards Luke's throat, but his son met the return strike and stepped back. The opening exchange traded without injury. Vader was both impressed and pleased with Luke's speed, but the Dark Lord was managing the fight, not trying to finish it. He needed Luke alive and emotionally broken. When the young man attacked more aggressively, driving Vader back with a flurry of strikes that briefly staggered him, the thought entered the Sith Lord's mind for the first time that his son might actually beat him. His emotional response cycled through surprise, then fear, then humiliation, and finally anger. When Luke refused to fight and retreated into shadow, Vader threw his lightsaber in a spinning arc. The blade sliced through the supports holding up the gantry where Luke stood, then swept around and flew back into the Dark Lord's hand. Then came the Dunmok that backfired. Vader reached into Luke's mind and discovered Leia's existence. He threatened to turn her to the dark side, and Luke snapped. The young man rushed at his father with a fury he had never known, a fury the Dark Lord had never known either. Each stroke hammered Vader backward. He was driven to his knees. Luke slashed his right hand off at the wrist. The hand, along with bits of metal, wires, and devices, clattered away. The Sith Lord's weapon tumbled into the shaft below. Luke then looked at his father's severed mechanical hand, then at his own artificial hand, and realized how much he had become like the man he fought. He threw his lightsaber away. Throughout the duel, Vader had felt his intentions growing unclear. The purity of his darkness was being weakened. He sensed doubt, remorse, regret. His survival system could handle skilled opponents, aggressive opponents, and even multiple opponents at once, but it was not built to absorb a sustained explosion of fury from someone whose raw force potential matched his own. And the cruel irony is that the Dark Lord's own greatest weapon, Dunmok, had created the one condition his defense could not handle. Only two things ever consistently broke through it. The first was emotional influence. Opponents with deep personal ties to the man Vader used to be could reach the buried identity of Anakin, creating inner conflict that weakened the Sith Lord's focus. Ahsoka cracked the helmet on Malachor. Obi-Wan sliced it open on the barren moon, and in both cases, these fighters didn't beat his technique. They reached the man underneath it, and without that personal connection, those cracks never appeared. The second was raw, uncontrolled dark-side fury from a Force user of equal power. Luke proved that on the Death Star. In Legends, Vader's own secret apprentice, Starkiller, from the Force Unleashed storyline, pushed the system to its absolute limit, matching the Dark Lord on both the blade and Force levels with a reverse grip style so unusual that his counter-training had limited data to work with. But there was one more fighter who recently tested everything Vader had built. He was not fighting the Dark Lord, he was fighting Anakin Skywalker's final evolution. In the canon animated series Shadow Lord, Maul's primary form was Juyo, the Ferocity form, the most difficult and demanding of all 7 disciplines. Juyo uses bold, direct movements, more open and aggressive than Form 5, drawing upon a deeper well of emotion. Its tactics overwhelm opponents with sharp, disconnected attack patterns that make the practitioner unpredictable. but Juyo leaves its user exposed and open to counterstrike. Vader had been preparing for this specific kind of fighter since before he became Vader. In the canon comic, Obi-Wan and Anakin, a young Anakin Skywalker modified a training droid to mimic Maul's fighting style and pressed Obi-Wan for details on how he had defeated the Sith assassin on Naboo. By the time of the Clone Wars, Anakin had already internalized the patterns of Juyo-style combat through countless simulated duels. Every lesson from every defeat that followed only sharpened that preparation further. Every one of Juyo's weaknesses came into play against Vader. Maul's mechanical leg had already been damaged in earlier episodes, breaking apart the mobility foundation his entire style required before the fight even started. The Dark Lord targeted that same leg right away, driving his blade into the damaged area near the hip, further crippling his opponent's movement from the very first exchange. Juyo's open attacking patterns played directly into Gemso's counter design. The harder Maul attacked, the more he exposed himself, and the more openings he created for Vader's strength-based counterstrikes. The former Sith Lord's aggression was actively feeding his opponent's fighting style rather than overwhelming it. Vader stripped Maul of control entirely. Juyo thrives when the practitioner sets the rhythm and overwhelms opponents with unpredictability. The Dark Lord forced Maul into a position where he could only react, never lead, turning the superior aggressive fighter into a defender. He fought 3 opponents at once with one hand, Maul, the Jedi survivor Devin, and Master Daki, while preventing the former Sith Lord from landing a single blow. His precision was tight and smothering, his defense nearly flawless. He barely spoke during the fight. Against other opponents, Vader used Dunmok freely, filling the air with taunts and threats. Against Maul, he said almost nothing. Speaking would have meant treating the former Sith Lord as someone worth engaging with, and Vader didn't. The silence itself was a weapon. Most importantly, the former Sith Lord had no emotional influence over Vader. Against Obi-Wan or Luke, the buried identity of Anakin creates cracks that can be used against him. Maul couldn't access any of that. There was no deep personal connection, no guilt, no lingering attachment. Although this fight came early in Vader's career, roughly a year after Mustafar, there may have been less of Anakin remaining within him than at almost any other moment in his life. The dark side flowed through him almost without interruption. There was virtually no inner conflict to weaken him, and no humanity rising to the surface to resist it. Maul's own assessment confirmed the gap. He fled from the fight. He collapsed the ceiling with the Force to create distance so he and Devin could escape. He told her they would need to train further before trying again. Years later, the former Sith Lord stayed to fight Darth Sidious on Mandalore without trying to run. He faced the Emperor confidently, but against Vader, he ran. The deadliest version of Vader was built by the people who beat Anakin. Obi-Wan's patience, learned through thousands of hours as sparring partners and sealed in fire on Mustafar. The dark side's fury, forged inside a suit of permanent pain. Every scar, every limitation, and every defeat became a weapon, and the only fighters who ever truly broke through were never the ones who matched his technique. They were the ones who reached the man still buried underneath the mask. But what exactly Vader's suit was designed to do to him, and what the Emperor built into it on purpose, is a story that goes far deeper than most people realize. Quick note before you go, members get early access and a few videos that stay off the main channel. If that's interesting, the link is in the description. Otherwise, here's another video you might like.